I wasn't supposed to be home that night. The conference in Boston had wrapped early, flights were overbooked, and when the airline offered a voucher to anyone willing to take an earlier flight, I took it without hesitation. I thought of surprising Daniel, maybe picking up his favorite Thai takeout on the way from the airport. I even smiled as I imagined the look on his face. That was the version of my life I was still living in, just a few hours too long. The taxi dropped me off just before sunset. The sky was dipped in copper, shadows stretching long across the lawn. Our golden retriever Winston didn't bark or greet me at the door. That was the first wrong note. I chalked it up to him being asleep upstairs. He was getting older. But the silence inside the house wasn't the warm, peaceful kind. It was vacant, stale, as if something had just been hurriedly erased. Daniel's shoes weren't by the door. The key dish on the entry table was empty. No glass of half-drunk bourbon on the counter. I rolled my suitcase quietly through the hallway, its wheels clicking against the hardwood like a metronome counting down to something I couldn't yet name. I called out softly, "Daniel?" Nothing. I walked upstairs, each step heavier than the last. When I reached our bedroom, I paused at the door. The first thing that hit me wasn't visual. It was scent. Sweet, floral, cheap. It was the same perfume Olivia had worn since college. Something from a boutique she swore by. Gardenia with a hint of something sugary, like rotting fruit hidden beneath blossoms. I hated that perfume. And now, it clung to the pillow on my side of the bed like a mocking fingerprint. I stepped inside. The bed was rumpled, the sheets hastily thrown back. Not in our usual way. Not lived in, but disturbed. The room looked like it had been used and abandoned. One of my silk scarves hung from the headboard, my red one, the one Olivia had once borrowed for a party and never returned. And then I saw it. Nestled like a parasite in the crease of the sheets, a single earring. Gold, oval, engraved with our mother's initials. Olivia had inherited the pair after Mom passed, wore them like talismans. I didn't pick it up. I just stared at it. Frozen. My body didn't go into fight or flight. It went into stillness. A silent, dangerous calm settled over me, like the eye of a storm. I felt nothing. And in that nothing, a sliver of clarity began to glow. I wasn't surprised, not really. My heart didn't shatter. It receded, like the tide pulling back before the wave crashes. I had been living next to a crack in the wall for years, ignoring it, painting over it, pretending the house was sound. But now the foundation had finally crumbled, and all I could do was stand there and breathe in the rot. I sat on the edge of the bed, not bothering to smooth the sheets. I just looked around the room, seeing it for the first time as an outsider. The wedding photo on the dresser, the scented candle Daniel never liked me lighting. My jewelry box, half open, as if someone had touched it. How long had this been going on? The question buzzed in my head like a fly trapped under glass. Olivia, my sister, my only sister. She used to braid my hair and steal my sweaters and tell me secrets under blankets during thunderstorms. Somewhere along the way, that love had twisted. She didn't want to be close to me. She wanted to be me. And Daniel. Daniel had always loved mirrors, ones that flattered him, ones that reflected back the version of himself he believed he deserved. When I started fading, giving more to our life than to myself, I stopped being his mirror. Olivia stepped in. I walked out of the bedroom without touching a thing. My suitcase waited at the bottom of the stairs like a stranger's baggage. I took it into the guest room and closed the door behind me. Winston padded in a few minutes later, tail low. He curled up at my feet without a sound, like he knew something had fractured. I buried my hand in his fur and stared at the ceiling. The smell was still in my nose, her perfume heavy and nauseating, like a wound that wouldn't close. Didn't cry that night. Not even a single tear. Instead, I watched the shadows shift across the room as the hours passed, listening to the sound of a home that wasn't mine anymore. Something cold and sharp had taken root in me. Not rage, not even grief. It was something older, quieter. A vow. They wouldn't see me cry. They wouldn't see me break. and when I moved, it would be like a ghost slipping through their lives, unseen until it was too late. That night, as I lay on stiff guest room sheets, I whispered, "Into the dark, you have no idea who you've betrayed," and I meant it. I met Daniel 3 days after we buried my father. I remember the way his voice cut through the gray fog of the reception, steady and measured, like the tick of a clock in a quiet room. He didn't ask me how I was doing, thank God. He just handed me a glass of water and said, "You look like someone who doesn't like small talk." I looked up, expecting pity. What I found instead was focus, calm, a man who didn't flinch at sadness. Back then, I mistook that for strength. I was 24, frayed around the edges. My world had been cracked open by grief, and he stepped in like scaffolding, solid, unmoving. He was 8 years older, already employed, already living in a condo with a leather sofa and a spice rack alphabetized by cuisine. I was still sketching dress silhouettes in the margins of my lecture notes, dreaming of finishing my fashion degree. "Design is beautiful," he said once, tracing the edge of my sketchbook with a finger. "But you work too hard. You deserve to breathe." So I did. I started skipping class to spend weekends with him in the city. I told myself it was just a pause, a romantic detour. One semester off became 2. Then I was folding my clothes into his dresser drawers, and my sketchbook was buried in a moving box I never unpacked. We built a life quickly, efficiently, a townhouse in the suburbs with white shutters, dinner parties where I arranged cheese, platters, and he poured the wine. We had routines, elegant and practiced, matching glassware, linen napkins, a calendar on the fridge marked with Pilates and quarterly business trips. It looked like a life you could frame. But I was always adjusting. To him. Not once did he adjust to me. Every time I voiced a desire, it was gently redirected. "Maybe next year." "That's a big risk." "Don't you think that's a bit much right now?" He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Daniel had a way of speaking like he already knew the ending, and any deviation was just chaos I hadn't thought through, and I believed him. That was the worst part. I stopped drawing, stopped daydreaming, stopped asking for more. I became the perfect wife, careful and composed. Not because he told me to, but because I thought that's what love was. Adjusting, compromising, being chosen. And then there was Olivia, my little sister, the wildfire. Where I had turned inward after Dad died, she had become louder, brighter, more alive, like she was dancing on a wire above her grief. She showed up at our house with bare feet and chipped nail polish, dropping her bag on the floor like she belonged there. And in a way, she always had. Olivia was the opposite of Daniel, and maybe that's why they saw something in each other. Before I ever dared to look, she'd laugh too loud at his jokes, wear my heels and ask, "Do you mind?" before walking out the door with them. She called him D, a nickname only I used until one day I didn't. But I didn't question it. I welcomed her in. She was my sister. She was family. And I believed that Daniel saw her like I did, as a slightly reckless, impossible to tame girl we both loved in our own way. I even liked how her chaos filled the cracks in our polished little life. She'd sprawl on our couch, leave rings from her coffee mug on my magazines, sing out of tune in the kitchen. Sometimes I envied her. Sometimes I remembered I used to be her. The first warning came at a family barbecue. Olivia and I got into one of our usual tiffs. Nothing serious. She had borrowed a dress of mine for the 3rd time and returned it with a wine stain on the hem. I snapped. She rolled her eyes. It was typical sister stuff, but Daniel, he jumped in. Hard. She didn't mean anything by it, he said, shielding her like a child. "Don't blow it out of proportion." I stood there, blinking, shocked. I was the one he shared a bed with, the one who had built a life beside him, and yet in that moment, he chose her. "She always takes things too seriously," Olivia chirped. With a wink brushing past me, I laughed it off. But something curled inside me that day. Something I didn't know how to name yet. Looking back now, it was like they were whispering behind a curtain I refused to lift. There were glances that lingered too long, jokes I wasn't part of. The night I caught them talking in the hallway, low, voices, his hand brushing her shoulder. I convinced myself it was innocent. She's just lonely, I told myself. He's just being kind. My mother used to say, "Your sister follows you like a shadow." At the time, I thought it was sweet. Olivia had always wanted to be near me, wear my clothes, use my lipstick, ask me which boys to avoid. She once cried when I left for college, swearing she'd visit every weekend. She didn't. But the shadow always returned. I never thought it would devour the light. The life I had with Daniel was a perfectly arranged tableau. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being the woman he fell for, and Olivia became a more vibrant echo of that version. I should have known. But love, real or imagined, blinds you with softness. You don't feel the rope tightening until you're halfway through the knot. It was supposed to be our anniversary, 8 years. Porcelain, if you follow the traditional gifts. Fragile, breakable, fitting. I wore the navy dress Daniel once said made my eyes look like candlelight behind glass. I even spritzed the perfume he bought me on our honeymoon, jasmine and vetiver, light and sweet. I hadn't worn it in months. It felt foolish, like dressing a ghost. We hosted dinner at our home because Daniel said he wanted to keep things intimate. I cooked, set the table, arranged the candles. It was a curated domestic portrait, the kind of evening we used to have when we still looked at each other across the table like we had secrets only we knew, but there were no secrets that night. Just one, gaping truth. Olivia showed up late. Of course she did. She swept in with her usual chaos, red lipstick slightly smudged, heels too high for our hardwood floors. She tossed her coat onto the armchair like she owned the place, and Daniel looked up from the wine like gravity pulled his eyes to her. She kissed his cheek, lingering just half a second too long. They sat across from each other, angled like a painting. She reached for the bread, her sleeve brushing his wrist. He laughed at her story before she even finished the punchline. When she spilled wine, just a drop, onto her blouse, Daniel leaned in and brushed it off. So gentle. So familiar. I felt it before I saw it. The electricity. The private channel between them. Our friends noticed too. I could see it in the sidelong glances, the forced smiles, the awkward shifting of wine glasses. No one said anything, but the air was tight with unsaid things. I smiled, poured more wine, pretended not to see. I kept my fingers around the stem of my glass like it was the only thing anchoring me to the floor. After everyone left, I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to tidy up. Dishes clinked in the sink. A candle sputtered out. The perfume I'd worn had vanished beneath the scent of red wine and roast chicken and her. Daniel was upstairs. I could hear the creak of the bedroom floor. Olivia had left her earrings in. The bathroom again. Gold hoops. Mine, originally. She borrowed them last spring. Something in me snapped. I walked into the bedroom, expecting to grab my phone, to text a friend, to scream into the notes app like a diary. But Daniel had left his phone on the dresser, unlocked, face up, a little green checkmark blinking from the notes app. Curious, casual, unintended. I told myself I wouldn't look, that I wasn't that woman. But my hand moved anyway. What I saw wasn't a text thread, not a selfie, not even anything explicit, just a shared note titled Wish List. There were bullet points, neat, organized. Bali, 2 weeks, yoga retreat. Open loft in the Arts District, white brick, big windows. Baby name, Elio, Nia. I stared at the screen, scrolled again. There were song lyrics, restaurants to try, a link to a couple's pottery class, a list of things to do before 35. Her birthday was next month. My vision blurred, my hand trembled, the phone slipping from my grasp and hitting the hardwood with a dull, final thunk. It didn't break. I wished it had. I sank to the floor. Something inside me caved, not in flames, but in silence. Like a room collapsing under snow. Every conversation we'd had, every touch, every laugh that lingered too long. It all rearranged itself in my mind like broken glass trying to form a window. She was my sister. He was my husband. And together, they had carved me out of my own life like rot from a tree. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was soft, slow. 1,000. Tiny cuts I hadn't felt until now. Daniel came in minutes later, rubbing his eyes like I'd woken him. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice low. I looked up at him from the floor, held his gaze, said nothing. He saw the phone. And he didn't. Flinched, didn't deny it, just sighed. And for a moment, he looked almost relieved, like I had finally caught up to the truth. "I haven't been happy," he said. It was the same tone he used when the water heater broke, or when he had to cancel dinner plans because of work. "Flat, rational, removed. We didn't mean for it to happen. It tasted like acid in my mouth." I laughed, loud, sharp, ugly. "You just meant to erase me," I said. He didn't answer. He stepped closer, crouched like he was negotiating a hostage release. "You can keep the house," he said. That sentence, that generosity. As if this home, this life, this foundation I built with him was a parting gift. As if I was the one being gently ushered out of a movie halfway through. I nodded. Just once. My heart beat loud and hollow in my ears. Then I stood, walked into the closet and pulled down my old duffel bag, the one from before Daniel, from college, when I still traveled light and often. I packed quietly. Sweatpants, toothbrush, the perfume bottle half full, a sketchbook I found in the back of a drawer, pages yellowed with time. He didn't try to stop me, and I didn't leave. Not that night. I slept in the guest room, beneath an old quilt my mother made before her arthritis got too bad. The corners were frayed. It smelled like cedar and comfort. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up, because something inside me had changed. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to run. No, if they wanted a future without me, if they had dared to imagine homes and babies and wishes while I set their dinner table and folded their laundry, they'd get one. But on my terms. In the me. Quiet dark, I made a new list, not on paper, not on a shared note, in my bones, and I promised myself they wouldn't see me coming. The attic had always been my grandmother's space. When I was little, she used to bring me up here with slices of honey cake and strong tea, telling me stories in a voice lined with age and warmth. Even after she passed, no one touched the room. It lingered like a closed book, sacred, forgotten. After the dinner party and the betrayal that shattered the life I knew, I moved into that attic room without a word. I told Daniel I needed space to think. He nodded, relieved. Guilty people often mistake silence for forgiveness. The room smelled of old cedar and dried lavender. Dust floated in the golden light like snow that had nowhere to fall. Her trunks were still there, leather buckled and time-worn, filled with lace, letters, and yarn-spun memories. The mattress creaked like it remembered another lifetime, but I didn't mind. In a way, I was starting over too. They thought I was broken. I let them believe that. Daniel still kissed my forehead in the morning like a man honoring an obligation. Olivia started coming around more frequently, under the pretense of checking on me. She brought soups, flowers, sometimes dresses, ones I'd worn years ago, repackaged like new. I accepted them all with a smile that never reached my eyes. Started documenting everything. Receipts left out, his calendar entries, Olivia's perfume lingering near the back door on nights Daniel worked late. I took pictures, time-stamped calls, logged details in a little red notebook I kept inside a hollowed-out dictionary. They were careless, arrogant, believing they had already won. I watched them like a scientist observing parasites under glass. But underneath the stillness, I was moving. At dawn, I ran. Through the tree-lined streets where no one knew my name, where the wind felt honest and cold on my skin. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I welcomed the sensation. It reminded me I was still alive. I cooked for one, measured pasta by the gram, chopped herbs with slow precision. I lit a candle at dinner, even if it was just me, especially because It was just me. Rituals mattered, and I began to paint again. At first, it felt foreign. My hands trembled when I picked up the brush. I stared at the blank canvas like it was daring me to remember who I had been. But slowly, the strokes came. Shapes turned to stories. I painted women, solitary, watchful, wrapped in red and gold. Each one more alive than I had felt in years. I applied for a job at a small local gallery downtown under a different name, Elena Marlowe, a nod to my favorite poet. The owner, an older woman with thick silver curls and deep laugh lines, hired me on the spot. She said I had an artist's eyes. I took the job and said nothing to anyone. I saved every cent. I opened a secret account in my maiden name, one I hadn't used since I was 24 and naive. I visited a divorce attorney 3 towns over. Her office smelled like lemon balm and power. She had kind eyes and a spine made of steel. She didn't ask why I wasn't filing yet. She just slid the paperwork across the table and said, "When you're ready." I wasn't hiding. I was hibernating, preparing. Then one night, as rain tapped softly on the attic windows, I opened a velvet-lined box I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a photo, Olivia and I, no older than 10, in matching dresses, yellow with tiny blue flowers. Our mother's favorite pattern. We were barefoot, standing in the backyard, holding sparklers like magic wands. Her hair was longer than mine. She was smiling wide, teeth slightly crooked, eyes full of mischief. I looked quieter, hands folded, a shadow in her shine. I stared at it for hours. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being her sister. I had become her rival, her benchmark, her mirror. And she had spent years resenting the reflection. Mom used to say Olivia followed me like a shadow. But shadows stretch long in fading light. I traced the edges of that photo, thinking about all the times I let things slide, the sweaters she forgot to return, the way Daniel always took her side in family squabbles, the subtle erasures, her perfume on my pillow, her hands in my life. She wanted to be me until she didn't, until she thought she could be better, and Daniel, he didn't fall. He stepped. He chose her, again and again in quiet, cruel ways, but I wasn't standing in their shadow anymore. I stood in front of the mirror the next morning, early light painting my face in half-tone. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me, not fully. Her cheeks were thinner, eyes more angular, but her posture had changed. She wasn't slouched or hiding. She stood tall, chin lifted, gaze sharp as broken glass. I touched my own reflection and whispered, "You're not broken." And I wasn't. Was becoming a different kind of woman. One who didn't beg. One who didn't weep behind closed doors or hand over pieces of herself like peace offerings. I wasn't angry. Not like before. I was clear. And clarity was far more dangerous than rage. The attic room became my war room. Stacks of manila folders, receipts, copies of emails, screenshots, printouts, all methodically labeled and dated. I wasn't just collecting proof, I was building a map, a silent, careful blueprint of everything. They thought I hadn't seen. Daniel had always been the type to leave just enough loose ends. A receipt here, an automatic email notification there. He'd signed up for paperless banking, thinking it would hide the transfers. But I found them. I tracked the slow drip of funds moving from our joint account to a separate one, an account, in his name only, opened just 2 months before our anniversary. Olivia wasn't subtle either. I had photos of her entering the house at odd hours, her car parked 2 streets over. The time-stamped security footage from the neighbor's driveway camera was the final touch. She thought she was clever. She thought a different lip color made her invisible. But I saw her. Every time. I remembered the perfume on my pillow, that artificial floral scent that clung like a stain. I remembered the earring, our mother's gift, buried in my bedsheets like an accusation. That wasn't a mistake. That was a declaration. They thought I would break quietly. Instead, I learned how to play their game. Better. I dug up the prenup Daniel had long forgotten I still had a copy of, tucked in a box with our wedding album. His idea, back when he was flush with ambition and full of speeches about protecting what we build together. He never expected me to remember it, let alone weaponize it. The clause was clear. Infidelity voided any claim to shared property, and thanks to my growing file, I had enough to prove it 6 ways from Sunday. I even contacted a real estate agent discreetly, inquiring about valuations on the house. Not to sell it, but to make it known that I could, that I had options, power. The pieces clicked together slowly, like an elegant puzzle. No fury, no panic, just precision. And when it was ready, I planned the dinner party. It felt poetic, returning to the very scene of the unraveling. I spent days preparing, curating the guest list with the same care I'd once used to arrange flowers for our wedding. Mutual friends, colleagues, people who had known us as the perfect couple. I chose my dress carefully, deep red, satin, the kind that caught the light and made people look twice. It was the color of endings and rebirths. I set the table with our best china, lit the long tapered candles. I used the wine glasses Olivia once borrowed and never returned. Gifts from our mother, back when we were still pretending to be close. That night, they came full circle. Daniel arrived late, claiming work. Olivia walked in minutes after him, pretending to have come separately. I greeted them both with the same measured smile. They played their roles like seasoned actors, laughing, toasting, stealing glances they thought no one noticed. I noticed. Everyone did. Midway through the evening, as laughter swirled around the table and the wine dulled the edges of suspicion, I stood and tapped my glass lightly. I thought tonight would be the perfect time to share some exciting news, I began. They looked up, expectant. I've been planning a little surprise trip, I continued, lifting a sleek envelope from beneath the centerpiece. Just one ticket, to Bali. Olivia stilled. Daniel's face twitched. Just a flicker, but enough. I handed him the envelope. Inside was a printed itinerary, first class, booked under his name with her birthday listed as the companion traveler. Oh, and the hotel, it's the same one from that wish list note, I added casually, sipping my wine. A cold silence trickled in. But don't worry, I said sweetly. The ticket's non-refundable. I thought you two would enjoy it more. Laughter bubbled around the table, unsure and scattered. I saw the flush rise in Olivia's neck. Daniel's jaw tightened. He pulled me aside not long after, into the hallway lined with our wedding photos. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Are you trying to humiliate me?" I looked at him, head tilted slightly. "Just tying up loose ends," he blinked. "You've lost it." "No," I said softly. "I've finally found it." The next day, an anonymous letter arrived at his office, addressed to the board. Inside was a full report, photos, dates, details of the ethical conflict in his affair with a woman listed as a freelance contractor on one of his recent projects. A clear violation of policy. I didn't need to expose him publicly. Just enough pressure in the right places. Just enough truth whispered in the right ears. He came home that evening with the weight of consequence in his footsteps. "You think this will make you feel better?" he snapped. "No," I said, calmly folding a dish towel. "But it will make me free." He stormed off, muttering something about lawyers. Good, let him. I was already 3 steps ahead. I didn't need revenge that screamed. I needed resolution that silenced. That week, I met with my attorney and filed the divorce papers. The case file was thick, solid, unshakable. He would lose the house, he would lose credibility, he would lose me, the silent foundation he had built, his lies upon. And Olivia? She texted me once, just once, a single line. "How could you do this?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "You taught me how." Then I blocked her. I wasn't cruel. I was precise. I had learned their language. Performance, charm, manipulation, but I didn't need to become them. I just needed to outgrow them, and I had. I set the table one last time. The china was pale ivory with silver rims, the kind we'd registered for with naive smiles and whispered dreams. I brewed the tea in the porcelain pot we had received from Daniel's aunt, another artifact of a life that no longer fit me. A tray of lemon shortbread sat untouched on a ceramic plate Olivia had once gifted me. She'd called it, "So You." Maybe it was, maybe it had been, but that version of me had died quietly the day I read their shared wish list, the living. Room was immaculate. A final performance. Sunlight filtered in through the linen curtains, casting gentle golden stripes across the floorboards. I left the window open, just slightly, so the scent of lavender from the garden would drift through the room. My scent. My mother's scent. The one that once clung to my childhood dresses and still lived in the folds of old letters I couldn't bear to throw away. I wore white, not for innocence, but for rebirth. They arrived separately, as always pretending. Olivia with her sunglasses and forced brightness, Daniel with his casual arrogance and expensive cologne. They didn't know what this was. Not really. "I just think we should talk," I had said on the phone. "Some closure would be good for everyone." They believed me. Of course they did. They'd built their entire relationship on the assumption that I was blind, weak, too soft to ever strike back. That my silence had meant surrender. They didn't realize silence had been my strategy. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his old place. Olivia hovered beside him, trying too hard to appear composed. Her fingers kept brushing against her hair, a nervous tic from childhood. I sat across from them, folded hands resting gently on the envelope I had placed in front of me. No more pretending. I poured tea into delicate cups. The clink of porcelain was the only sound for a moment. Then I pushed the envelope forward. "What's this?" Daniel asked, already frowning. I looked at him. "This," I said, voice calm, "is what betrayal looks like from the outside." He opened the envelope and slid out the documents. Photos, printouts, financial records, a copy of the prenup, a typed timeline of their meetings, receipts, security, footage stills, notes from the lawyer, a transcript of Olivia's voice on the home line when she thought no one was listening. She made a strangled noise. He went pale, then red. "This is ridiculous," he said, dropping the papers like they burned. "You've been spying on us?" "No," I said. "I've been surviving you." Olivia grabbed a photo and stared at it like she could erase it with sheer disbelief. "Where did you get this?" "From our front door camera. You never noticed." The light blinked. Her mouth fell open, no sound coming out. "I wanted to believe it was just weakness," I continued. "A mistake, a moment. But it wasn't. It was a pattern, a plan, and I stopped pretending I didn't see it." Daniel leaned back, arms crossed. "What do you want, huh? An apology?" I smiled, small and unbothered. "No, I want a clean ending," he frowned. "You're bluffing. This prenup is valid, and the clause on infidelity is binding. My lawyer is already filing the divorce. As of this morning, a temporary freeze has been placed on the accounts." He shot forward. "You can't do that!" "I just did." Olivia finally found her voice. "You don't have to do this." I looked at her, really looked at her, my sister, my shadow. The girl who used to hold my hand when we crossed the street. The teenager who borrowed my dresses, my words, my life. "You told me once," I said, "that you wished you had your own life, not mine. Well, now you do. How does it feel?" Her eyes filled. But I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a hollow clarity. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "Yes, you did," I said. "You both did. You just didn't think I'd notice, or care." Daniel stood. "You're not going to win, you know. You think you've got control? You've got nothing." "Really?" I tilted my head. "Because your board will be receiving a package next week. Details of your relationship with a contractor you failed to disclose. Screenshots, emails, enough to suggest conflict of interest and, at the very least, professional misconduct." He blanched. Olivia looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. The woman I'd been, the one they'd discarded, had been stripped away, layer by layer, in the quiet months while they plotted and played. I stood, slowly. There. Won't be a scene, I said. There won't be a scandal. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for closure. Daniel took a step forward. Please, we can fix this. No, I said gently. You can't fix what you buried alive. They both stared at me, pale, stunned, unraveling. I walked them to the door like any polite hostess. No yelling, no theatrics. Just a soft goodbye at the threshold of a life that no longer belonged to them. When the door closed, I stood still for a long moment, hand resting on the brass knob. It was done, and I wasn't broken. I was clean. The weeks that followed were quiet. Like snow falling on a forest after a storm, I kept the house. The deed was already in my name. Daniel didn't fight it. Not once the lawyers showed him the evidence. I don't know if he lost his job. I didn't ask. I didn't care. The attic room became my studio. I painted again, not for anyone else, but for myself. I painted women with eyes like oceans and hands like fire. I painted landscapes that bled. I painted my reflection, fractured, then whole. The local gallery where I had once worked offered to feature my pieces. I said yes. My name, my real name, was on the wall. I started sleeping with the windows open. I liked the smell of lavender. It clung to my sheets now, to my skin, to the silence I had cultivated like a garden. One day, while cleaning, I found the ring, my wedding ring, in the back of a drawer. I held it up to the light. It had dulled. I placed it in an old jewelry box and slid it shut. Not to forget, but to remember what I survived. Sometimes I passed the bedroom where they once betrayed me. I didn't flinch anymore. I had repainted it in soft blues, new sheets, new scent, a fresh start. There were moments, still, when grief slipped in sideways. But it didn't stay. I had made peace with the ghost of who I used to be. She had been kind. She had been trusting. And now she was gone. In her place stood someone else. Not harder, but wiser. Not bitter, but blooming. Someone who knew that the quietest voice can carry the sharpest truth. And that leaving doesn't always mean escape. Sometimes it's the beginning of becoming.